Welcome to the Loresworn War College for Hearts of Iron 4. This is our advanced class, and you're watching episode 302, Airplanes, Understanding the Stats. Air warfare is a somewhat complicated concept in Hearts of Iron 4 and doesn't follow all of the same rules as ground combat, but the two definitely interlock, and you can gain an advantage in ground combat by knowing how air combat works. We've put together two videos to teach you how to do this, and in this first one we'll just be looking at different types of aircraft, what they can do, and also at air bases and what the important stats relating to them are. In the next video we'll teach you how to actually put it into action. Like with our division design guides, we've used a console command to unlock every type of equipment up to 1941, so we will be dealing with planes that have slightly better stats than what you might be starting with in the default 1936 scenario. Before we look at any specific stats, let's take a look at what the different classes of aircraft are, and I'll give you a brief description of what each of them is best used for. Close air support are very light craft that aren't that great at fighting other aircraft, but are very good at doing damage to ground units and assisting a ground assault. Fighters, more appropriately light fighters to distinguish them from heavy fighters, are the best air-to-air aircraft in the game. They tend to have a short range and not be especially durable, but they are definitely the best at taking out enemy fighters. Naval Bombers are light craft that are, of course, best used for doing damage to ships and enemy ports. Heavy fighters are a class of fighter that is more geared at going after bombers and also projecting power over a longer range if you don't have convenient access to nearby air bases, due to the fact that they can go a lot farther on a tank of gas. They are, however, not as agile, and a wing of light fighters will usually take apart a wing of heavy fighters in an even match. Tactical bombers are small, fast bombers that are best used in tactical strikes against enemy ground forces. They can be used in port strikes and strategic bombing, but they won't do as much damage as a strategic bomber does. They can, however, given appropriate air superiority, do massive damage to enemy troop concentrations. And since they're a little bit faster than strategic bombers, they're also a little bit better at outrunning enemy fighters. Strategic bombers are slow, long-range, heavy-hitting glass cannons. The only mission they can undertake is strategic bombing, meaning they're not going to have a direct effect on combat, but they can have pronounced effects on your enemy's economy and production if used in the right places and the right concentrations. Just be sure to give them a good escort, because fighters will take them out in the blink of an eye. Now, to look at specific stats, let's go ahead and pull up the Hawker Typhoon, which is the 1940 close air support for the British. First thing you'll see is the resource cost to produce one, followed by the missions it can undertake. The Typhoon can be used for close air support, which allows it to deal damage to targets in a ground battle. Naval Strike, which allows it to deal damage to ships, and Port Strike, which allows you to bomb enemy fleets in port. You'll notice that for all of these missions, there is a tooltip saying if executed at night, this mission has a much lower chance of being detected, but it suffers a penalty to acquiring targets, and we'll talk more about night attacks in the next video. Service manpower is the amount of manpower needed to field one of these planes. Of course, only one of those is the pilot, the others are various mechanics and support staff needed to get it in the air and keep it there. Air defense is basically the air combat version of health or HP. This is how much damage you can take before the plane is destroyed, and it will also affect when the plane will go back to base based on the orders that you give it for how damaged it can be before it must return to base, which we'll talk about in the next video. Agility is probably the most important stat for airplanes, at least for fighters and close air support. It affects both how hard they are to hit and how easy it is for them to hit other planes. So a more agile plane is both better defensively and offensively when fighting other aircraft. Light fighters like the Spitfire tend to have very high agility, whereas strategic bombers have extremely low agility. Naval Attack measures how much damage you can do to ships in Naval Strike and Port Strike missions. Ground Attack determines how much damage you can do to ground forces when engaging in close air support. Reliability works exactly like it does with ground equipment. It determines the chance of breakdowns over time. Operational range for aircraft determines the circle that they can operate out of. This is a little bit of a complicated one that we'll go into more in the next video, but basically the range of an aircraft from the airbase where it is stationed creates a certain percentage coverage over an area, and based on how much coverage you have over that area will determine the efficiency of your air missions. If you want to think about it in the simplest terms, higher range is always better. Air attack determines the amount of damage you can do to enemy aircraft if you are on an interception mission or are being intercepted and wind up in air combat. Air superiority determines how much this specific plane adds to your air superiority total for an area. Having more air superiority points over a certain area than your enemy will give you bonuses to your ground forces. Naval targeting works kind of like agility, except it's used to target ships as opposed to other planes, and doesn't really have any effect on how likely you are to get hit. And then, of course, max speed is just how quickly the plane can get from one place to another. Tactical and strategic bombers also have a strategic bombing stat that determines how much damage they can do to infrastructure when on a strategic bombing run. Now here I've selected the airbase near Norwich in the East Anglia region of southern England, and deployed a wing of close air support and a wing of tactical bombers in the area so I can show off the pertinent stats for air bases. Probably the most important one, and the one that I didn't even find out about until I had already been playing Hearts of Iron for about 40 hours, is this airbase capacity. This is increased by building higher levels of air bases in an area, and if you station more planes here than the capacity allows, you'll take a huge penalty to the efficiency of your air missions. This basically makes it impossible to take over an airbase, say, somewhere way out in eastern Russia, and station all of your fighters in close air support there and just use them to swarm the enemy army. You'll actually need to build up infrastructure in order to deploy more planes, especially in rugged areas that don't have a lot of airbase infrastructure already. It also encourages you to use multiple air bases to cover the same mission area if needed, in the case where you have more planes than you can actually station at any given base. Now, since I have southern England selected, and that is where the East Anglia Air Base is located, the current range is 0 kilometers, but if I were to click on another region, like northern France, it'll tell me that the distance from the currently selected airbase to northern France is 652 kilometers, which will help you determine, along with looking at the stats of your specific planes, whether they can make it to the area and perform missions there efficiently. Another important thing to look for is radar efficiency. This is based on how many and how high-tech of radar stations you have built in a given area, and they give greater efficiency to your interception missions as you'll be more able to detect enemy fighters and bombers incoming. Each region has a value for friendly radar efficiency and enemy radar efficiency, so you can get a good idea of how much intelligence you have and the enemy has regarding what is flying around above your heads. Beyond that, you'll also be able to see friendly and enemy fighters, support planes, bombers, and anti-aircraft guns operating in the region. And if there's actual combat ongoing, this bar will change to show air superiority, which we'll talk about more in the next video. Also pay attention to these little green circles here. Since they're green, it means that we're operating at a very high mission efficiency. In fact, since we're so close to our home air bases, we're currently operating at 100% efficiency. But these circles can turn yellow or even red to indicate that you are sending your planes outside of their effective operational range and they're operating at less than full efficiency. Efficiency can also be affected by things besides range, such as if you have too many planes stationed at one airbase. And finally, you'll want to pay attention to this little window, and the map itself, as weather has even more of an impact on air units than it does on ground units. Clear weather provides no modifiers, but if a great storm shows up, things could change very quickly. Enough to get you acquainted with the stats that are important to airplanes and air bases. Stay tuned for the next lesson when we're going to teach you how to put it all into action.